but we are learning User's Guide to the Soul, which is a beautiful, beautiful kabbalistic text. And right now we're in a discussion about the balance between the power of doing a physical mitzvah, which we just learned is the whole purpose of creation, to make a home for God here in the lowest realm. And to do that, you need to do a physical mitzvah of some kind, versus the kavanah, the devotion, the emotional intensity that I put into the mitzvah. And that is the light that fills up that home, let's call it. So both are important, but as we have said every class, the mitzvah is like a 1 and the light is like a 0. So if you start with a mitzvah, and then you add kavanah, feeling to it, now the mitzvah becomes from a 1 to a 10 or 100 or 1,000. But if you don't start with that 1, with that mitzvah, now all the feeling you have, it has nothing to attach to, and it can just dissipate. It risks being just a 0. So the mitzvah is prime, action is prime, has primacy, but then kavanah, that expands the power of the mitzvah. And I want to go through. I keep reviewing this because it's a little complex. I want us to have the structures in our. So I want to go over, and I apologize I didn't send this around to those in my class. I'll try to get to it this week, but of course it is up on the video if you want to review that as well. So we're looking at mitzvahs versus kavanah, and the mitzvah reveals God's essence. It makes a home for God here in the world. I look at a mitzvah and I know, oh, that's God. But how much light is there, that depends on me. How much light comes through that actual mitzvah depends on my kavanah. So I might be just a little physical mitzvah with not much intention. It's just like I'm peeking through a door, through a peephole, and I see, oh, that's God's will. This mitzvah that's what God wants. I get it. It's revealed. There's nothing hidden, but not so much light comes through versus a larger window. Maybe I have a little bit more, versus a full, beautiful open window versus a full surround room. And then we looked at the 4 ways I can do a mitzvah and divided them also into 4 categories. Those are corresponding to the 4 categories of things that exist in the world. So we went through inanimate, which is domem. Plant, it's a second category, which grows, it's not inanimate. An animal, called chai, which has emotions, intellect, and finally humans, medaber, people who speak. And these 4 categories of created things correspond to the 4 categories of mitzvahs that we might do. As we said, that is an action mitzvah done without kavanah. That's the level of inanimate. The level of plant corresponds to a mitzvah of speech and thought without kavanah. So maybe I did a blessing, but not with tremendous feeling. Then the level of animal corresponds to, now I'm adding kavanah, but it's a kavanah it's just a natural love for me that was there. And you can go back the last couple of classes to hear the discussion of where it comes from. And medaber, that is a mitzvah done with intellectually generated kavanah, where I have an understanding of the relationship between me and God and what's happening. I've meditated on it as we do in our class, and I've generated these emotions that really have a root in the intellect. And so they are the highest form. And then we went through the different 4 categories that in chapter 38, the Alter Rebbe goes through. So I'll go through quickly for review. If you want more detail, go look at our last few classes. And all this happens because all these categories and these worlds emerge from the 4 letters of God's name, right? Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, which emerge from the Sfirot. So the 4 categories that the Alter Rebbe discusses in chapter 38 are the 4 worlds, which are 4 spiritual worlds, not other timelines, but really above time to begin with. So Asiya, Yetzirah, Bria, and Tzilut, these 4 worlds we're talking about in this chapter. Asiya is the world of action. Yetzirah is the world of formation. Bria is the world of creation. Atzilut is the world that's just emanated. It's basically godliness. We also had different angels we'll discuss that live in different worlds. I won't go into that now, but most of them live in Yetzirah. Some of them live in Bria too. We have 4 levels of the soul that we're going to discuss, which again, I won't go into deeply right now, but these are different capacities of my soul, the physical, the one that interacts with the physical body. The second one is interacts with my emotions. The third reveals itself as intellect, and the fourth is transcendent. And finally, those all come out of Havaia's name, the Yud and He and Vav and He. So I know it's a lot of pieces, but I just want you to keep track of that as we go through the chapter so we can follow the discussion. And we also can see how that flows through the whole model of our soul working with, where this umbilical cord is our soul. It flows up through these four spiritual worlds. Each aspect of the soul is living, so to speak, in that spiritual world. Each one of these spiritual worlds is illuminated, so to speak, by a different letter of God's name. And of course, the angels might be, kicking around in there, etc. So it all comes together in this model, and it all flows out of the 10 sfirot that you could picture like lines flowing down through these spiritual worlds and through our soul as well. And finally, we did go through how this all emerges from the sfirot in the form of God's four-letter name. So the Yud is that point of Chokhmah, and Keter is actually on the tip of the Yud. We stretch that down to form a Vav, and that is the 6 midot. That's the 6 emotions that we've learned from Kabbalah. Then the He expands whatever's before it, so it expands that point of Chokhmah into a 3-dimensional shape, as we said. I won't go through that whole explanation. And if you look at how the whole name works, now you have the first half and the second half, which is, again, flows out of Keter and Chokhmah and Bina. And then the second half which flows out of the 6 midot and Malchut. And by the way, one thing that I didn't mention, I'm trying to figure out who's making sound here in the background. Oh, there you go. One thing that I didn't mention, Malchut, just like the Vav, corresponds to the number 6, and of course comes out of the 6 midot. The He corresponds to the number 5, and that refers to the 5 organs of articulation of the mouth. So we have lips, teeth, tongue, palate, and then throat. So breath, which is the sound of the letter He, to make speech, passes through my throat, then my palate, then my tongue, then my teeth, and my lips. And that is the breath passing through those 5 openings of speech to become shaped sound. So you just see it's so beautiful how each one of these letters flows out of its own aspect within the sfirot. Again, if you're just joining us, that is going to be a little complicated. I'm just giving you the snapshot. And in terms of the world, the Yud illuminates Atzilus, the He illuminates Bria, the Vav Yetzira, and the He Asiya. And in terms of our soul, that corresponds to Chaya, Neshama, Ruach, and Nefesh. So it's a lot. I know it's a lot of vocabulary corresponding to all these sfirot. But I want to keep giving us that snapshot. So as we go through the Alter Rebbe's conversation, we at least have a bearing, an anchor about each of these concepts. So I know if you're new, there's probably like a whole question mark there. But for anyone who's been with us, any questions on these different 4 categories before we dive back into the Alter Rebbe's text?
Cantor,
Yes,
you've gone really fast. Did Laibl Wolf write a volume 2 of his book?
He didn't write a volume 2. I wish he did.
We
he
need
does
those
have
pictures, those box things. I'm trying to write it down. It's not fast enough. Can you send us those?
Yeah, I could try and send it, but when I send it, it'll be simpler because I can't move it around. But these are posted. So my suggestion is go to last week and run through the video section where we went through, and it's all there. I think that'd be the easiest way because I'll try and send it this week, but it'll be just flat pictures, right? It won't be interactive.
Anything will help.
Yeah. But Laibl does have a lot of wonderful other materials I highly recommend. But I drew this from a bunch of different sources, from Yitzhak Ginsburg, other sources that I learn from. So I don't think it's all in one place. It's kind of different people present it different ways.
Okay.
Okay, let me pause and get my phone, make sure there's no questions on Facebook. Entertain our online community as I'm gone for a moment.
Went away.
Hello, online community. It's a
Thank you.
great class.
Sorry
Watch-
about that. Sorry about that delay. Right, so I'm gonna be watching you guys on YouTube. I see. Let me see here. I've got you here. So if you have any questions, please, if you're watching on YouTube, just go ahead and put them in the comments right here.
So,
Comments.
I have a question. So we're all in a SIA right now, right?
We're actually all in all these worlds, right? We're in all these worlds. So because my soul extends up like an umbilical cord, I actually exist in all these worlds, just like my heart is beating and is responding in very complex ways. And I'm not aware of it. I'm not really like conscious of that, but I still have a circulatory system. It's running. I have a very complex nervous system that's doing many things, adjusting my breathing, etc. And I'm not always aware of that. But I'm existing that way, right? So that's how this is. I'm aware of a SIA most of the time because the physical world is the primary component of reality to my physical senses, and that's the world I wake up in and I kind of operate in. But still, just like my body has a circulatory system and a nervous system, my soul has an aspect of itself that is living in Yetzirah and an aspect that's living in Bria. I'm just not aware of it, right? So just the one gloss is I'd say we're actually all in all these worlds. It's just that my place where I'm aware, that's in a SIA for sure, in the physical world. Good. So let's hi Liz. Let me know of any questions. Thanks for watching. Let's go into page 555 in our text. We've been discussing the different levels that we can operate at in the context of how my kavanah elevates a mitzvah or Torah learning. And essentially, if I do it without kavanah, it gets stuck, as we'll see, in sort of just above the physical world. It kind of rolls around in there. If I do it with emotion that is natural to me, I can elevate the mitzvah up to the level of Yetzirah, and it creates light there. And if I do it with an intellectually generated emotion from meditation, now I can elevate it up to the level of Bria, which is a little hard to do, but we'll see today that there's a shortcut we can use that'll allow us, even if we're not naturally at the level of Bria, it'll let us function on that level. Chayinu davka neshamot mamash.
However, this statement that the abode of tzaddikim who serve God with intellectual love and fear is in the world of the Bericha applies only to those souls which are actually on the level of neshama. The level of neshama being that of intellect, as the verse states, the divine neshama will give them discernment.
So remember, we talked about levels of the soul, and that is nefesh, ruach, neshama, and chaya. We're not talking about so much today, but right now, nefesh, ruach, and neshama. So the nefesh part of your soul, that's the part of my soul that actually lives in the body, so to speak, animates the body, relates to the body, and connects to the physical world. So most of us operate mostly on that level. Some big spiritual people, they operate on the level of ruach, and that's really where they see the world from their spiritual emotions, so to speak. And major tzaddikim operate on a level of bria, where they see the world as just abstract creations that are quite unified with God. Their only existence is that they have potential to be separate from God, but it's very abstract. So a big tzaddik, their soul is going to operate on a level of neshama, but they still have a ruach that's in the world of Yetzirah, and they still have a neshama, of course, that's in the world of Asiya. Otherwise, they wouldn't be alive in a body. The fact that they're alive in a body means that their nefesh, lowest level, is operating. So when we say that their souls are on the level of the neshama, it doesn't mean that's the only part of their soul they have. It means they're conscious of that. They're aware of that. Like a ballet dancer is going to be so much more aware of how they move when they're walking down the street. And most of us are just going from point A to point B, right? So a tzaddik on the level where their neshama is their home base, they're really going to be aware of how the world is in terms of bria and that intellectual abstract light, even as they have a ruach that's functioning in Yetzirah, and also nefesh that's moving their body around. But that's not where their head is. That's not where they live. Shehen bichinat mochin degadlut ein sof baruch hu.
And which represent a superior intellectual perception of the blessed Ein Sof.
Right, so that's the kind of person that is told about the Alter Rebbe, who wrote this book, that he would try to write the word atzilus, and he'd write an aleph, and they'd find him passed out in a spiritual stupor an hour later, because he couldn't even write the first letter of atzilus without going off into divine spiritual ecstasy and dvekus, clinging to God, and he just sort of pass out almost, right? So, I mean, that's a major figure, but generally someone who's on that level, that really, their intellect is able to meditate on a divine concept such that it's just alive and powerful, and they sense the godliness in it. It's a tremendous thing. But what if you're a little lower? Aval b'chinat haruach shel hatzadikim.
But the Sadakim who are at the level of Ruach,
So what about these tzadikim? V'chein she'ar kol nishmot Yisrael she'avdu et Hashem b'tchilu rechimu ha'mesutarot b'lev klalut Yisrael. There you go ahead, Rick. And similarly,
all the other souls of Israel who serve God with the natural fear and love hidden in the heart of all Israel, not with love and fear born of intellect.
so here's the thing. Say I'm lower level tzaddik, which is still a major figure, right? I mean, these are tzaddikim as we learned. But I operate in a level of ruach. I have natural love of God, and that's how I elevate my mitzvahs. And here I am, and I'm only getting up to what we call the lower level of Gan Eden, the world of Yetzirah. And I'd like to be like these other great tzaddikim who elevate their mitzvahs to the world of Bria, the higher Gan Eden. And how can I do that? We get a free pass every so often, and that is because when a holiday comes, like Shabbat, or as we'll learn, Rosh Chodesh, it's not just a special time because it's marked on the calendar. The quality of existence is coming from a more lofty place. And so because the spiritual source of reality is from a more lofty place, all of reality elevates. All of reality elevates. So I wake up on Shabbat, I'm not in the same universe that I was when I was on a weekday. And so not by my own qualities, not by my own work, but just by dint of the spiritual quality of that day, that tzaddik might have now access to Bria when they normally would only have access to Yetzirah. And of course, that's why there's this tradition of kind of saving up everything you do during the week and then really focusing on it on Shabbat, because I know, okay, say in the week I'm rushed and I go and I do my morning prayers and chick-chock, I'm done and I rush off to work. And I know I want to give tzedakah that day, so I take $1 and I put it in the tzedakah box. I try and stop and focus on it, but I was distracted, and the whole week might go by like this. And you see sometimes, the religious world can be whizzing during the week, but what happens on Shabbat? Now I slow down. Now the spiritual world has been raised up, and now I can focus on everything I've done during the week and go back and catch it again and add kavanah and elevate it even up to the world of Bria, we'll learn, right? If I'm using my Tavuna emotions that we learned back in the long short path, even someone like me, a normal person, is able to elevate Torah mitzvahs up to the level of Bria if you really focus carefully on Shabbat and go through your week and add intention and devotion to those mitzvahs. So that's our free pass, and this is I find it very inspiring. If you get to Shabbat and you feel like maybe you weren't as mindful as you liked during the week, and you did some things on automatic perhaps, instead of feeling disappointed about it, feel excited, because now on Shabbat you can go grab all that energy and you can elevate it up to the world of Bria, which is really a world just for tzaddikim, pretty much. Ein olot l'sham rak b'Shabbat v'Rosh Chodesh levad.
Ascend thereto to Bria only on Shabbat and the new moon, when all creation ascends to a higher level, as it is written every month on the new moon and every week on Shabbat. All flesh will come to prostrate themselves before me, says God. It is only then that the souls ascend to the world of Bria, the higher Garden of Eden.
And how? What's the actual process? Derech ha'amud shemigan eden hatachton legan eden ha'elyon shu olam ha'bria hanikra gan eden ha'elyon. And who are we at? Is it Doreen? Are we at you? Yeah, if you'll
Doreen.
unmute for us, Doreen. Oh, you're still muted, Doreen. I know. Sometimes the buttons elude me too. There you go.
I got it. By means of the pillar that extends from the lower Garden of Eden, Yetzirah, to the higher Garden of Eden, that is the world of Berea, which is called the higher Garden of Eden.
So we know about Gan Eden, about the Garden of Eden, but we might want to know there's actually two of them in the Zohar. There's a lower Gan Eden and a higher Gan Eden. And so, when you talk about all these tzaddikim and these souls, and they went and they had ascensions, they went to heaven and they found the station of this person or that person, that all relates to the spiritual quality of the person and the work they did, and they create a station for themselves in a different level. So if you're working on the level of Bria, that's the higher Gan Eden. That's defined by more abstract intellectual spiritual energy. And if you're working in the lower Gan Eden, that's defined by emotional spiritual energy. And the light that your Torah mitzvahs are creating is radiating in that world. And of course, we know you really perceive it and enjoy it and see the full force of it only after you're out of a body. So that's why heaven is said to be such a pleasurable thing, because right now I can't see that spiritual light with my physical eyes. The physical world is kind of drowning that out. But when I'm outside of that and all that static is gone, so to speak, now I see the full force of that light I've created and which Gan Eden perhaps it was in. So how do I now elevate the things that I did? If I just did them with natural emotion, but I want to operate on the level of Bria, on the higher intellectual, emotional level, I do it by means of this amud, this beam or pillar that extends from the lower Gan Eden to the higher Gan Eden. So, whether you're jumping up on the pillar or whether, the mitzvahs are going up through that pillar, somehow there's this beam connecting them, and we can use Shabbat and Rosh Chodesh, and I assume other holidays as well, to really now take everything I've done in the interim and elevate it to my level with my best work, and then even above my level using this beam. And if you're at home, you might say, well, how do I do that? What's the technique? In the end, there really is no, there are no steps, if you know what I mean. There's no 5-step process. This is really as simple as opening and closing your hand, right? I know my hand. I can open one finger, the next finger, the next finger. It's how do you do it, right? How would you explain how it works? It's a human function. And these levels, they're also a human function of our soul. And I promise you, if you focus on it and you use your imagination to get at it, there's something behind your imagination. It's not your imagination. I can imagine the Garden of Eden. Doesn't mean that I'm there, right? But the subtle piece behind that imagination, there's something happening. And just give it a try. Sit and focus on Shabbat while you're praying on some mitzvah or Torah you did, and focus on this pillar that's available. And when you focus on it, you can direct your Torah mitzvahs there if you do with intention and emotion. That's it. It's not. There's no technique involved, so to speak. By means this pillar lehitaneg al Hashem velehanot miziv hashchina.
I mean, this pillar, these souls ascend thereto to delight in God and to bask in the radiance of the Shekhinah.
So not just my Torah mitzvahs, but also the actual souls on Shabbat. We say we're in a higher place as well, and we actually, even though I'm not consciously aware of it necessarily, there's a part of my soul that now is pulled upwards by the lift of this day, and actually is absorbing this light. And that's really, I mean, even if it's as simple as just you love the joy of Shabbat, and you have a sense of the beauty of it, and that radiates from inside you, that may be all I'm consciously aware of, and that's wonderful. But I'm doing amazing things, and as we'll learn, it's not really about my soul and what I absorb. It's really about the Torah and mitzvahs and how I elevate them, which we'll learn shortly. כי אין הנאה ותענוג לשכל נברא אלא במה שמשכיל ומבין ויודע ומשיג בשכלו ובינתו.
The intellect of a created being delights and derives pleasure only in that which it conceives, understands, knows, corresponding to Chabad, and grasps with its intellect and understanding.
So here we're talking about delight, right? Tanug, pleasure. And we might say, oh, well, when I'm a soul out of a body, I'll recognize the beauty of a mitzvah and the beauty of the abstract. But now, here I am, and the physical is more real. But even in the physical, as one of the teachers I learned with, Tully Silverberg points out, even in the physical, the highest pleasures are really not the physicality of the pleasure, right? If you think of a meal that you had in your life, and think of the most memorable meals you've had, and go back and say, okay, what are the dinners that I truly remember, or breakfast I truly remember? Are you really thinking about the actual food you had? Are you thinking about the dish and the plate and the sauce? Are you thinking about the spiritual things, like the conversation that happened, the person you're with, the relationship, the atmosphere? I promise you, if you had that exact same food as you had at that memorable meal, but you had it in a cold room by yourself, or with somebody that gave you the food with a scowl on their face, it would no longer be a memorable meal, right? So as much as we think, oh, this food's delicious, and that's what makes a meal pleasureful, really, even in the physical, it's the higher order pleasures that are most, that touch us the deepest. And the highest pleasure for a soul, in fact, is the pleasure of the intellect at grasping something new, and especially grasping something about God that is new. If I could, and sometimes I need to really clear out my attachments to some of the physical stuff for that to really come to the fore. But if I can make myself quiet down the attachments to the physical, then I really start to see the highest pleasure that intellectual understanding, especially of God, creates inside my soul.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'd like to go back to the previous paragraph. And I talked about the delight of God and bask in the radiance of the Shekinah. Did that imply that the Shekinah is resident in Berea, or is it?
Hold on. Just give me 1 second. There's a staff meeting going on that I am trying to completely sign out of here because it keeps beeping. I hope that did it. Sorry, I was getting distracted by there's a Outlook Teams meeting popping up on my computer. It's just as I'm talking about the static of the world, that was getting me off my game here. Sorry, tell me the question again, Eleanor. I apologize.
Okay, it's the paragraph before where it says bask in the radiance of the Shekinah. Does that mean the Shekinah is resident in Berea, or is it resident in all the worlds?
So the Shekinah is Malchus, right? So the Shekinah is there in all the worlds at a different level, because it keeps recreating itself over and over, or lower and lower, so to speak. So when I'm basking in the radiance of the Shekinah, that means we'll learn the Sfirot are the godliness of each world. And so Malchus is the Shekinah of that world. So if I'm talking about, I guess I'm not getting out of that staff meeting, so pardon me, there'll be some beeping as we go through this. If I'm in the lower Garden of Eden, if I'm in that world, the 10 Sfirot That's the godliness of that world. And the light from those 10 Sefirot are coming out through Malchus, which is the Shekhinah. And now my soul is basking in the light from Shekhinah or Malchut of that world. But it recreates itself again down in the world of Yetzirah. And Yetzirah also has godliness, and Malchut is creating, or the Shekhinah is creating light in that world, and also in the world of Asiya, in the lowest world. So the answer is yes, but it happens in every one of the worlds.
So the Shekinah is in Malhut, but when we talk about each of the worlds, there's Ein Sof. Is that different than Shekinah?
So Shekhinah is Malchut.
Okay,
It's like, for our conversation, let's say they're the same thing, just different name for the same thing.
right.
And Ein Sof is the infinite, and the 10 Sefirot are united with the Ein Sof. So, no, they're not the same thing, but also they're not different because they're united, if you know what I mean. Right? So you can't say the 10 Sefirot are separate from the Ein Sof. So is the Shekhinah Ein Sof? Kind of yes. But then again, it's not Chochmah of the Ein Sof, right? It's just Malchut of the Ein Sof, which is its expression. So that's that mystery where somehow the Ein Sof has these 10 Sefirot, which are completely united with it, and yet have an identity that we can call the Shekhinah.
Makes sense. Okay.
Makes sense to you? Good. It didn't to me as I was saying it.
Oh.
Where are we? These souls, because, sorry, I think we're at these souls are privileged. Yeah. Uma shezochot neshamot elu la'alot lemala meha
Cantor, I
malachim.
think you're up. I think you're up one more paragraph. As much
Oh,
as
as much of it?
No.
Yeah, you're right. Ma she'efshar lo lehavin ulahasig me'or ein sof baruch hu. Al yedei chochmato uvinato yitbarech ha'meirot sham be'olam habriya.
As much as it can grasp of the blessed Ein Sof light through his wisdom and his understanding, which radiate there in Beriah, enabling the soul to perceive godliness. For as mentioned earlier, the Chabad of Atzilut, to which the Alter Rebbe refers as his wisdom, his understanding, radiate in Beriah, for which reason Beriah is the world of understanding.
So just like we saw that it's the Hey of God's name, or Bina, that radiates and illuminates the world of Bria. So with these tzaddikim, if that's their home base and their whole outlook is one of intellectual appreciation of godliness and God, then they're going to be absorbing that light. They're going to be functioning on the level of Bria. Right? That's a very high level. Most normal people, their soul is not stationed so that they can really function on that level on a normal basis, and they have to use the lift of Shabbat, so to speak, to be able to get their Torah and mitzvahs up there. Uma shezochot neshamot elu la'alot lemala meha malachim, af she'avdu b'tchilu rechimu tiv'im levad. I think we're at... So, Joyce, did you just read? Sorry, I'm not hearing you. Here, let's, Susan, why don't you start us at the top again and correct me if I got it wrong.
Okay, these souls
Yeah.
who served God with natural love and fear are privileged to rise occasionally to Beriah, higher than the angels, whose abode is in Yetzirah, as mentioned above, never rising to Beriah, although they too, like the angels, served God only with his natural fear and love. Why then is their service of God considered superior to that of the angels?
So it does beg a question. We talked about angels versus humans, and we talked about how angels are higher up in the spiritual worlds than humans. They have a very intense love and fear of God that you couldn't fit into a human being. Even the biggest tzaddik with the highest level of love of God, that doesn't compare to an angel in Yetzirah that's saying, holy, 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 and is burning up with this love of God. So angels are much higher, but humans are greater. And why are we greater? Because we do it out of free will, free choice. So an angel, they're on automatic. That's their mission. That's what they're going to do. They have no other option. And God's not impressed by that. We, although we're much smaller than them, we're lower down on the totem pole. We're actually greater because when we do it, it's out of free choice. It's out of free choice. And that's the difference between humans, as we said, and animals, that our intellect actually can control our nature and can change our nature. And it's between us and angels as well, that angels also have an automatic love or awe, whereas we choose to have love or fear. We choose to do a mitzvah versus just nap in the morning. And that's why now, you might ask, why would an angel who is in the world of Yetzirah, why wouldn't they also be elevated on Shabbat to the world of Bria, just like we can? And the reason is because the world of Bria is defined by intellect, and intellect is synonymous with free will. It's intellect that gives free will. Emotions don't give you free will, right? When you feel something, then you have energy and you do it. It's only intellect that can step out of the situation, analyze it, decide what is right, and then reintroduce itself and change nature and control nature. And that is free will. It's not because of a degree of intellect or a depth of intellect that we have free will. It's the nature of our intellect that it can control our nature and emotions. So even though I might not be a person that lives in the world of Bria, so to speak, as we said, that functions there, and I'm only using my natural emotions to do things, and it's just I'm uncovering them, I'm remembering them, and then I'm using them. Still, I had to choose to not do the opposite. I had to choose to do a mitzvah or learn Torah, and I had to choose to uncover those emotions. And because it's related to choice, its root still is in a subtle way in the world of Bria, and it has access to the world of Bria. Whereas angels that have no free choice, now they're just in Yetzirah. They're not going to elevate on the Shabbos the way a human can. Does that make sense? That whole free will piece, we spoke about it a while back when we talked about angels to begin with, and now we're talking about it in terms of being able to access the world of Bria on Shabbat, and it's because we have free choice, even if we're operating in an emotional space.
Cantor, can angels ever elevate themselves? Or are they just in the different worlds that they're in?
Well, an angel is defined by its spiritual level. So it's almost like if an angel were to be able to elevate itself, it would be a different angel, right? In the spiritual world, things are defined by their spiritual identity. And so the only reason there's two angels is because one has a different mission, or one is higher or lower than another. So if an angel were to change its mission, that would be, by definition, a different angel. So I think the short answer is no. I'm not an expert in angelology and all that, but my understanding is that's a human ability to elevate ourselves. It's what makes us so special in the universe, whereas an angel may be loftier than us, but it can't go up, it can't descend. Hayinu mipnei she'al yedei dechilu rechimu shelahem itkafya sitra achra hamlebeshet begufam.
Because through their fear and love, the Sitra Achra, clothed in their body, is subdued.
All right, so an angel may have tremendous love or awe for God, but because it doesn't have a choice to do the opposite, it's not toppling the Sitra Achra as we learned in previous chapters. It's not raising the glory of Ein Sof, as we say, because an angel could have woken up and decided to take a nap and instead got up and said the Shema. That's only us that does that, right? So because it takes free will to subdue the Sitra Achra, the other side, the superficiality of the universe, and to close it off, now that allows us to get up to Bria. Ben bichinat sumera likbush hatavot uleshabran.
Whether in the case of fear, in the realm of turning away from evil, refraining from doing evil, and thereby conquering and crushing their desires through not giving their illicit desires, expression in thought, speech, and action.
Right, so that applies to the negative. Say I wanted to, yell at somebody for doing something that was different than what I thought should be happening around me. I'm arguing with divine providence, and the shapes are not moving in the way that I predicted. They're making other noises, and I stop myself and I say, no. I wonder why that person's doing what they're doing, but I'm not going to yell at God for divine providence. Forget it, right? And so I stop myself from doing a negative thing, yelling at another person in anger. It's a big sin. And when I do that, unlike an angel, I subdue the Sitra Achra, as we learned. I subdue the shell of reality, the other side of reality. And that free will is what allows that mitzvah to elevate up to Bria through this process. Or
whether, in the case of love, subduing the Sitra Achra in the realm of doing good, as mentioned above. That is, actively pursuing the observance of the mitzvah out of love for God, despite the contrary desire of the animal soul, which is rooted in the Sitra Achra.
Or also, of course, doing something positive, giving charity, learning as we're doing, celebrating a holiday when Purim's coming up. So lots of mitzvahs. Maybe we'll take some time to talk about that before we're done. Vehem hayu bale bechira livchor bera chas v'shalom.
These souls, while in the physical world, have freedom of choice. They might have chosen evil, God forbid.
And so, yeah, I only did it with my natural emotions, but I had free choice. I could have done the opposite, unlike an angel. So even though the angel is now complaining, how come I'm up here creating all this light and praising God and having awe for God up in the world of Yetzirah, and little Smolash down there with his tiny drop of emotions, he put a dollar in a pushka this morning. How come he gets to elevate that to Shabbat? Because I could have chosen not to. I could have chosen not to, and that's the function of intellect. And where does intellect live? Intellect lives in Bria. And so because I'm fundamentally an intellectual being, even when I'm operating with my emotions, now I have access to Bria, which the angel didn't. I find this very cool stuff. I find this actually like I know it sounds abstract, but I find it so practically interesting to use this system precisely to really work on elevating the things that I do, on elevating my Torah mitzvahs. I don't know, do other people find this like, how fun would it be on Shabbat to focus back on the week on a mitzvah and focus on my emotion and my intellect and meditate and try and use this pillar to elevate my mitzvahs? Is that, I'm just geeking out on it, or are you guys with me? Yes, Sharon?
That was a question I was going to ask. When you said you can catch up on Shabbat, I was wondering if you would relive in your mind the time when you prayed when you weren't intentional.
That's exactly it. Yeah, exactly it. You bring it to mind.
So you get a do-over.
Yeah, you get a boost. You get a boost.
Yeah,
so
and you actually get a chance to do it over, even though it's past.
Well, yeah, you're not precisely doing it over, right? I mean, if I didn't do the mitzvah correctly, it's a lot. If I didn't say the Shema,
Right.
I can't re-say it, but it's in a folder. And left, I still, the deadline hasn't passed, so to speak. I still have access to it. I can open up the folder again and I can add, I can put it through Grammarly. I can add beautiful font. I can add, I can add a design to the page. I can make it a really beautiful thing.
You can decorate it, yeah.
Yeah, and you decorate with your emotions. It's our emotions that do that. So when I bring that mitzvah back to mind, I know it's now probably sitting here in Asiya, kind of just waiting to see where it's going to go. It's still in transit. It's blocked up, so to speak. And when I bring it to mind, and then I fill that mitzvah with emotion, now I'm adding rocket fuel to my mitzvah, and I'm letting it blast up to whichever world I'm accessing. So 100%, yeah. You go through your week. You bring to mind also the negative things, because we want to do tshuva for those, but especially the positive things. And you open up that folder, and by adding emotion and meditating on the mitzvah with emotion, with devotion, now you're beautifying it and you're elevating it.
Thank you.
I feel funny about that. I mean, if you sit there on Shabbat and say, wow, what a great job I did, during the week when I did that, that was really terrific. I mean, I feel a little, self-serving or something. It doesn't seem quite right.
Yes, well, you're preempting the Alter Rebbe is one of his points he's making very shortly, which is that it's not about the light that I receive, and it's not even about I don't go too deep into it. But yes, of course, to the extent that I'm focusing on how wonderful is this light that I made for myself in heaven and how many brownie points I get and how great a job I did.
Yeah.
Now it's not the highest form. It's not sincere because we're making a home for God. That's the point. So the highest pleasure is that I gave God nachas, right? And how wonderful is that God feels. And I'm proud of that, but not because I did so great. I'm proud because God's having nachas. And if I can make sure I'm always other-centered, that's the genuine way to do it. But, you want to focus on it. And if there's a little ego comes in along the way because you're happy you did a mitzvah and you feel good about yourself, that's it's still better than just leaving it, if it was on automatic, it's still better than just leaving it as it was and not dealing with it, right? I know a little ego can get wrapped up, as you're saying, but we're going to discuss that later in the chapter. Yes, Sharon.
Which is was my second question. I think it goes here. Is what we're doing here when we do this class and work really hard on it is with our intellect, is this a mitzvah?
Yes, Torah study is a mitzvah that includes all the other mitzvahs. So this is like tzedakah. This is an all-encompassing mitzvah. It's a very powerful chance to do exactly this. And I think looking at our faces, this is a group that really is doing it with focus, with intention. So I'm quite sure that a lot is being elevated of the physical world right now. But come Shabbat, now we can bring it up even higher and bring it back to mind and really collect much more light and give God much more nachas by using that beam.
So that's why this feels so good then.
Yeah, in a more concise way, exactly.
Right. Now,
That's why this feels so good. I remember I started learning Torah with Rachel Turkovich back in Toronto when I was studying to be a cantor, and I'd gone to Hebrew school and or day school, and I'd sung in synagogues and I was involved, but I never sat down so much and learned Torah just for the sake of it. And I remember this pleasure I was getting that surprised me because I was there just to learn this to pass my exams, right? It wasn't like I was dedicated to learning Torah at the time. I was in musical theater. And I just remember this pleasure that was coming from somewhere that seemed outside of myself. I didn't even recognize what it was, and I kept it every time. So yeah, we each have our own source of that, and it should feel good to give God nachas.
It's joy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yet is that we have one more on this page, right? Yet they chose good.
That's correct.
Behem hayu balei.
Okay, let's do both. Vehem hayu balei v'chira livchor berach chas v'shalom uvacharu betov lechafil sitrachra listalka yikara dekucha brichu chulu kitron haor chulu kaniskar leel.
These souls, while in the physical world, had freedom of choice. They might have chosen evil, God forbid, yet they chose good, to subdue the Sitra Hara so that God's glory be elevated in all worlds, with an elevation similar to the superiority of light emerging from the darkness over ordinary light, as mentioned above. By dispelling the darkness of Sitra Hara, these souls added to the light of holiness.
Beautiful. So we're gonna finish there. It's our free choice that makes even the world of Yetzirah ultimately have intellectual roots, because we could have chose the opposite. That's our intellect that chooses, and therefore we have this pillar, and we can elevate our Torah mitzvahs. I hope you'll try it. on Shabbat and on Rosh Chodesh. I certainly make it a practice, and it's a beautiful thing to do, and adds tremendous meaning and purpose to the week. Because even the times when you skipped over and were on automatic a little bit, you can go back and reclaim those and elevate those. There's a lot of material left during the week, and you can just squeeze all the beautiful juice out of that and fill your cup. And as we said with Noreen, right when we start next week on page 559, we're going to talk about the real purpose of this, which is not to give myself light, but is to elevate the Torah and mitzvahs. You see right in the next paragraph. So he's setting us up for this question, and you guys are getting instincts for that. But of course, today is it's Erev
Excuse
Purim.
me, One second. You mentioned Shabbat and the new Rosh Chodesh.
Yeah.
And you mentioned real briefly about the other holidays. Does it work also on those, or not as much, or is it different, or how?
I'm like 90% sure it applies to all of them. I've assumed that it does. I haven't asked any of my teachers that question specifically, but I'm working on the assumption that yes, that it applies on the festivals too. And if it doesn't, it's good work to do anyways, to go back and add emotions to your mitzvahs. It helps in many ways, even if they get bumped off that pillar that's available. So we've got Purim coming up. Some of you may be fasting. I'd like to go through just some of the things involved with Purim. One is a fast during the day today. So I apologize if I've been a little bit distracted from not having breakfast at the normal time. But of course, what are the different things you can do as Reformed Jews on Purim? There's 4. I wonder how many we can get. There's 4 mitzvahs for Purim. And who can help me name those for anyone joining us today?
Getting drunk.
Getting drunk. And of course, the caveat is we don't want to get completely wasted. It's just drunk. We don't want to get completely inebriated, right? So getting
Reading the Megillah.
giving tzedakah, and specifically tzedakah to poor people. So you want to, if you can, if you're in a big city and there's always people in need, you can roll down your window and have in mind this is Purim. But there's also ways you can give through funds that go directly to poor people. I heard reading the Megillah. And by the way, there's 2 options, right? You want to do it twice, rather. Once tonight and once tomorrow in the day. And then the last one we forget, but there's another one too. Okay, Shalach Monas. Yeah, Shalach Monas part of it. But there's a 4th actual instituted part of the day itself. And that is to have a feast. To have a feast. So yes, Mishloach Manos is one of them. And that one you want to give to at least one other person 2 different types of food. So if you can do like something that's a cookie that has one blessing and a fruit that has another blessing, now you got that covered. But there's also an interesting thing to do this afternoon shortly. And that is if you can get yourself a $50 coin to represent both the half shekel that we were supposed to contribute at this time of the year for the temple, and also to counteract the silver that Haman gave to Hashverosh, you're meant to give 3 half shekel pieces or 3 half denomination pieces into a tzedakah box, and you can do it for each member of your family. So I have a plate of them. When we're at synagogue, I usually put these out and people can use them. But if you can track them down, you put the 3 in a tzedakah box and you take them out and maybe put $2 or $5 in to replace them, hand it to the next person, they put them in. It's a really sweet thing to do. And this really, it's a holiday that speaks to a lot of the themes coming up in this chapter. And that is when we get to the world of Atzilus, now we're above even intellect. So there are some rare tzaddikim that aren't even on the level of Bria, they're on the level of Atzilus. I mean, Moshe Rabbeinu, Avraham, Sarah, right? And what is Atzilus? We're going to learn Atzilus is total self-nullification above the level of intellect. And that really relates to Purim, because what is Purim all about? Why do we drink on Purim until we can't tell the difference between Haman and Mordechai? It's because at that level, we're totally nullified. We're seeing the world from God's perspective where everything is good. Everything is good. Dark and light are the same thing at that level. And so, yeah, to my eyes, Haman is a villain and is the worst thing that was ever created. But you know what? God says, I put Haman here so you guys would resist him. And you guys, Mordecai would lead the Jewish people and you'd all become more committed to Judaism. Not one Jew would convert to save their lives. You'd bring tremendous light into the world. And look what a good thing it was. Right? So to us, Haman looks like a bad thing. But to God, from that level, it looks like a good thing. And to get there, you have to actually go above the level of Bria, above intellect. And that's what Purim is about. Purim is leaping up to the level where even your intellect, you can't keep track. It's just, everything is from God's perspective and right and wrong and black and white. My intellect has stopped. I'm not even there. I'm in the world of Atzilus. So we're gonna learn a little about perhaps what tzaddikim at that level, we can at least kind of picture how they see the world, and we'll learn how we can keep flowing as Jews most productively. So wishing everybody an amazing Purim. Should be Freilach, should celebrate responsibly. And if you can find a way to hear a Megillah, that's beautiful. And we have, of course, many online activities at Temple. I hope you'll join us for our special Purim Shabbat and Sunday morning with the kids.